All right, quick quiz for us. How many guys were able to read 2 or 3 of the articles for this week? Oh, excellent. How many guys were able to read the handout we gave you last week on Lost from Paul Tripp? Good. And we got notes again this week. Pick up, there's another article, I'll kind of feature that when we get to the end from Paul Tripp, another great helpful principle. We may interact a little bit tonight with that other article that you read. How many guys were able to get a moment where you were, if your children are old enough for you to interact with them a little bit about some of the material, how many guys were able to do a little conversations with them about the big concept in the back? Okay, just a few. All right, so one of the things that two things I just want to stress that maybe doesn't show up in a book when you study something like this. There's something about doing something for several weeks that gives you an opportunity to interact with your own life's absorption of things. When I go to a conference over a weekend or just hit something really quick and lots of it, I can just move on and just not soak in it long enough. And so this is a great opportunity to soak in some parenting elements. And you probably won't do that again for quite some time. So how valuable is it just to think, hey, let me just take advantage of this moment. Let me clear some other stuff out. Maybe I'm interested in reading something else right now. Let me put that aside. Let me just use up my space just to interact with this topic and just see what the Lord wants to do in our lives. So the other thing is developing some habits of relating to your kids in some of these categories. It's just really easy for all of us, and we'd have plenty of stories in those categories of life just gets busy, so plenty of kids, they've got plenty of things going on, and we're just running from thing to thing to thing. Meaningful conversations are really an art. Right? I don't know if you figured out sometimes your kids, if they're going to have a conversation with you, it may not at all be convenient to your biological clock or whatever else is going on in your world. But finding a moment where they can download some things and they can interact with you and learning to create that space is just so helpful. So, you got a little bit of an excuse built into this. You can just talk to your kids and say, hey, we're going to the parenting course. I learned something really cool the other day. Could I just run this by you real quick? Let me just ask you a question. And I think they're going to be eager to just lean in and interact with you over some of that stuff. All right, so we're going to try and make a little better use of our time tonight. We went over last week. We're not going to do that again, trying to serve our children's ministry folks. And then you guys have got kids. If you got to get them off to school and get them ready for tomorrow. So we'll try and be a little more careful. All right, heads up. If you read this week, subject matter, some of you may feel like, hey, this is a sweet spot. Some of you may feel like it's not. But I'm going to try and pull it into the sweet spot in some of our discussion elements. But 2 things that I think would be helpful to keep in mind as we watch the video. First is, how do your children understand human dignity? What's their understanding about other human beings? Right, so that's going to be interacted with, and it's going to be interacted with from an angle of cultural issues that are taking place and how people see fellow human beings. But I want to pull this category into this, and this is what the Paul Tripp article would be helpful with. How do you understand human nature? Right, because there is much of what's presented in the book is about the image of God that is in man, but the paradigm we operate out of it starts with that, but then the fall takes place. And so your understanding of human nature is massive because you parent something that answers to your understanding of human nature. So what is your understanding of human nature? That Lost article I think was particularly helpful. So we'll interact with that a little bit, and I'm going to have Gina come up with me after the video. And so you don't have to have a question tonight that's on abortion or racial issues. We're also trying to pull this into the daily grind of parenting, just stuff going on in your household, stuff going on in your own life that you just confront on a daily basis. Any questions you want to ask, we're just going to throw it open to whatever you'd like to ask about in just a minute, or after we've done the video. All right, so we're going to watch the video. It's about a 30-minute presentation again, and then we're going to have some discussion time. Take some notes. There's some couple of great thoughts that are shared, just both in the parenting practically category as well as the interacting with the culture elements. Write some of those things down, and then I'll set you up to go through the questions after we watch the video. Hope that was helpful. Let's make sure we've got full tables, or if you guys are sitting by yourself, if you just kind of find some space to squeeze in with someone else who's got some space. On page 40 and 41 of your manual is where you'll find your questions tonight. We had a great help from just somebody at our table just taking on the role of steering some things and making sure we move to the next question at some point. So if you guys got somebody at your table wouldn't mind volunteering to do that, just keep the table moving. A dozen questions, you don't have to get to all of them. If you're getting some really good discussion about one or two, stick with that. Hey guys, serve your tables by participating but not dominating, right? You know what that means? Right? So share, but be aware. We want to hear from a number of folks, so give some other folks a chance to interact if you've answered a few questions already. And enjoy, and we'll come back in about 40 minutes. All right. Hey guys, if we can be wrapping up at the tables, we're going to spend just a few minutes interacting with you guys. Yeah. Is that on?
Check, check. Well, hi, everybody.
Here, I'm going to put a shot of you guys can spin around in your chairs there.
What are we talking about? To be too hard on our kids when we share things, okay?
Try not to. What do you do with the picture, Ryan?
Well, I'm going to go ahead and just do a brief introduction before we move to question and answers. I'm Gina, for any of you who are new here. I know we're getting to know little Brooklyn's mom and dad, so they're new and they may not know very much about us. But Keith and I have been married for 34 years. We have 7 children, ages 30 to 16. And we are on the descent of our parenting journey with only 2 boys at home. And they have been just an absolute delight to raise. But I did want to say that Keith and I are not parenting experts. We have not written any parenting material. But I would also say that the years that we've invested in raising children have been some of the most challenging but meaningful and significant years of our life. And I'm speaking for myself, but I think that Keith would agree. And one other thing that I wanted to say, that unlike the panel that we are listening to and receiving so much from, Keith and I, we live among you, and that's by God's design. And we would love nothing more than to come alongside you as you navigate every season of parenting, because they're all so different. And, one little myth that I would like to dispel that I think a pastor's wife can live under is that, we're too busy and we're unavailable. We have our own family needs, and there's so many needs in the church. But maybe that was me 10 years ago, but that's just not where I am now. And I really would love nothing more than to support you, to pray for you, to pray with you, to believe God for the things that you want in the lives of your children. Lots of books have been read, but what was most helpful for me in those intense years of parenting, lots of little ones at the same time, was, certainly reading books. And every article that, we're putting in your hands is so important. But there's nothing that can replace sitting across the table from a human being, from an older woman, to encourage you, to offer a perspective that may be different than the only one that's in front of you, to just support you. And so I really hope that you would let us do that. I hope that you would let me do that, because it really is my heart for you, particularly moms with young ones. But I used to think that I only had grace for my kids. It's like, okay, oh gosh, no, I'm not a teenager mom. Like, I have my teenagers and I've got the grace for that. But as you grow and as you grow in the years of parenting and as you are embracing others in your life, I have just a passion for little children as much as I do for our teens because they need a lot of grace. And so anyway, that's all I got.
That's good. That's good. I know, parenting, right? It's a tough thing. We love reading a lot of books and getting a lot of input. But there's little pieces of life experience that you just try and grab knowledge and apply it to your situation. And parenting is this process thing, and it's a long haul. And there are things that you're going to pick up by coming to things like this or reading some articles or books that you've come across, new ideas to address something that's going to help you at some moment in your parenting. But what's really helpful when you ask questions, and we were just parents who asked a lot of questions. We had enough kids in different stages to where we just always needed some help and some input. And there's something that takes time to happen in our kids' lives, that sometimes you just need to talk to somebody who's been through your season, who's walked in the spaces that you're walking in, because you keep thinking that time is not a factor. You just keep thinking the right idea is the factor. If we could just get the right idea, if we could just do this. But kids are a moving target. And, I used to joke every once in a while from the pulpit, I felt like 7 kids was like a lab experiment. You got a variety of them. We had 4 boys and 3 girls, different ages, different temperaments, different responses to things. And the big word that eventually we kind of figured out, different moments of maturity. And maturity is something that goes off in them more than it is something that goes off in you. You've got lots of ideas, you're waiting for them to come to life, but there's some things that you're just going to have to wait for, and the waiting is really hard. Because they're in process. And so, as Gina mentioned, whatever way that you can get some encouragement and help along the way. And, I look around the room here, you got some veteran parents here in the room that you can ask good questions to. They're here because they just raised too many kids and they still have kids at home, like us. But, so anyway, part of what we wanted to do in this little segment each evening is just kind of have coffee with you. And I know it's a small table, but it's a big room. And just whatever's coming to mind as you're kind of interacting with some of these things, or maybe just as you're doing life, you came to this whole, study with your own questions about, hey, this is where we are right now, and this is the stuff that's really challenging us as parents. So wherever you're at in the journey and whatever's popping to mind, we're just going to open this time up just to kind of let you shout out some questions, and we'll interact with them and throw them back in the audience if we need to ask somebody else for some thoughts and ideas. So what's coming to mind for you guys? Leo.
Could you share with us how your the gospel went to each one of your kids summer, how they received the gospel?
Yeah, question about how our introduction of the gospel went with our kids. I'm not sure where to start. I would start with one particular book, The Gospel for Children. I don't even know if that's around anymore, but when we were little, it was a picture with little phrases, several pages, and it really just walked them through the aspects of the gospel. It told a redemption story, told them about how to respond to the gospel. And so we wore that book out. We just would sit and read through it night after night. So that was familiar, the images. And so even when and you could travel through ages with them. So when they were really little and they couldn't read, you just point to the image, and the image brought to life what you had been talking about over and over and over again. So the images let you bring some thought to them. So that material was very helpful. And Gina's going to have to help me with a lot of stuff. My memory doesn't, I know I have 7 children, but beyond that, I start to question a lot of what I can remember these days. I would say this, and this goes into a little bit of just kind of understanding the nature of people. I have one daughter who, it's funny when your children start to ask you this, Dad, are you ever going to let me get saved? Because I really wanted to interact with them in their understanding and their faith, right? So the kids early on could mimic things. and they want to please us. And so they got two motivations for doing this for unrealistic and not real personal reasons. But trying to see their real understanding of things. And so looking at your children in terms of how they're encountering the things that are described in the gospel. Do your children look like they're encountering conviction? That'll be one of the first places that something shows up in their life. If the only time they respond to something is when you script it for them and you force them to apologize to somebody else, hey, you got to do that. That's part of correcting. But when you start to see your children feeling something on the inside of a sense of awareness, when they're affected by their own sin or a sense of conviction, childlikeness, and then a sense of repentance, their desire and ability to be in agreement with doing the right thing and their responsiveness to that, making sure they can understand something about the person and the work of Christ. Can they really kind of say some of that back to you? And so I think we've got some written out testimonies from them, and trying to get them to put in their own words and understanding what it meant to respond to the gospel. But I can remember answering the daughter who asked that question and honestly saying, God knows your heart, and he knows what faith is there, and how you are actually extending yourself toward God in a way that I can't really know. And you may have responded to God in such a way that you really are saved. But I'm just trying to be careful, and we want you to make sure you understand what you're believing and how to engage that in genuine faith. So that may be a long question. I hope I somehow got in the neighborhood of what you're looking for there. I don't know if you can remember. Gina's homeschooling them, so she's getting a lot of time to rehearse with them and to help them walk through some biblical understandings, and coming to faith issues were rehearsed plenty in those settings, and so they had a lot of chances to hear what that sounds like.
But I think we were, very careful about not just allowing a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old to just mindlessly ask Jesus into their heart. We felt like there needed to be an understanding of faith and repentance. And we certainly didn't want to discourage that, but we wanted it to be genuine, and we didn't want it to be something that, a little 3-year-old is going up to take communion. There's brevity in that. There's meaning in that. And the more that they know, the more that they will, begin to understand. And like Keith said, when you see a child really repent or really apologize, and, again, we were never really quick to, okay, are you ready to accept Jesus into your heart? For them, it kind of went off at different times. 2 of our children accepted Jesus at VBS with their teachers, and tears, and ran up to their dad's office and wanted to tell someone, which is another evidence, when someone gets saved, they really want to share that. And so those were very meaningful circumstances for me, because it was some of my friends leading my children to the Lord, and so.
That's good. What else?
So this is not about coming to Christ, but about the PlayStation. I'm curious if you have it's very difficult.
It's a PlayStation question for those of you who have young people and teenagers. I try to interact with that question with a sense of the way in which different age groups and children play, the way we played growing up. To be careful that something that's new that's come along is technology. It has something about it. It does have some consuming elements to it that I think we do need to pay attention to. It's got addictive qualities to it. It does something to sort of mental processing that is a challenge. But let me move it out of the moral category, because some of us grew up. The second I got home from school, I was in the neighborhood playing. My parents had to tell me when to come home. I was interacting with people playing kickball in the street or probably vandalizing a neighbor's house or something. But yeah, so we figured out ways to turn that into trouble, to get into trouble. There were social dynamics, there was some communication going on. All right, so now kids do a lot of that stuff with a headset on, with somebody who's not in the room with them, and so they're playing a game, but we were actually physically together playing a game. I think you need to be careful when you touch that in a way that makes the way you grew up more moral than the way in which they're growing up. Like there's something really just totally wrong about what you're doing. It's like, well, it's just different in that category. But what is also a heads up difference is certain things interact with us in a way that they reach into us, and when they can grab a hold of something and hold on to it, that power over us is something we do want our kids to be aware of. And that can be a number of things. It can be everything from, laziness can do that in a child's life. Pornography can do that in a child's life. Different social addictions can do that in their life. So I think learning our kids and seeing how is that doing for them, is this withdrawing them from doing life in a way that they're beginning to not be able to function in other settings? They don't have much conversational connection capacity. That they just know how to do a game stimulus. They don't read well. They don't do slower stuff. That's in another league. Does PlayStation make diapers now? I don't know. They probably should. If they're not, we should probably market that. That would not be a bad idea. You don't have to get up and go to the bathroom anymore. You can just play for hours. I think there's a week on technology that's coming towards the end of the book. So I think that'll be a great thing just to interact with just some wise and practical ways to address that, because it is a unique mental element, interaction with a device.
I just tell my boys to please quiet down.
Yeah.
Because you have those headsets on,
That's right. Quit
and you cannot
yelling.
hear how loud you are, and I'm trying to go to bed.
That's right. They're yelling across the house. Stephen.
So how do you help your children stand up for those on the margins of society? I'm just thinking about our family. We have 3 little girls. Kind of go to their school, they're in a bubble. So how do you introduce them to that concept of margins of society and perhaps the gospel?
Yeah, I don't know if I got a dozen ways to think about that, but I something that does stick out, and it's a little politically charged, is, our kids, even as we were talking at the table, our kids get something served up to them, so they learn how to relate to it. So there's racial elements, and there's news headline elements, and you guys will remember this. Growing up, my parents had a little bit of a running commentary with the news at night. And so, news was going on, and they had something to say about that group and those people, and you just picked up on that along the way, and you kind of developed a sense of attitude towards those things. And later on, most of that was racial. My mom was from backwoods Mississippi. My dad was from New Orleans, born in 1918. So the racial issues that they grew up in, that was the setting of the household that I grew up in. Then I get saved, and the dignity factors of seeing, wow, everybody's in Christ. That came pretty clear to me pretty early, and realize that's what we have in common. We have Christ in common. And so that challenged some of those bad deposits in me, but I learned them in casual conversations. We never sat down and had a class and said, okay, son, take notes. This is who you need to make fun of. This is who you need to not like. They just kind of picked up on it. I did. And so when we do that politically, all right, so I know that there's border issues going on in our country. You can't watch the news at night. There's border stuff all the time. And the border stuff is mixed in with politics, and so it makes you kind of interact with that with an attitude. And so what gets lost in that is real human beings standing at that border. And when you interact with somebody, there's a lady in the church who she came into the country illegally. And she came in through her mom, who brought 3 kids. Well, actually, she wasn't born yet. Her 3 older siblings came in with her mom. And when you hear her story, it's like all of a sudden there's a human being involved. involved. Now, this has nothing to do with, how do you solve this border crisis? Okay, totally different subject. Yeah, there's borders and politics and decisions that got to be made. But how do I interact with that in the sense of any kind of compassion towards the people that are marginalized? We're a predominantly white church. You're going to bump into, at some point, somebody's going to bring up reparations, and you're going to either like the idea or think it's ridiculous. And at some point, your kids will pick up on your sense of how you interact with people who have been marginalized and been affected by stuff. That stuff, for me, is in the common spaces of our kids' lives. And we're just making a comment about a dumb policy from that idiot president. Oh, and by the way, I just taught them how to respect or not respect another human being, because that guy in that office, who I don't like his ideas, and I'm treating him like he's garbage. Those kind of things are teaching our kids stuff that we have to figure out how to disagree with policies and governmental statuses while at the same time awarding dignity to human beings that we're interacting with. And that's a challenge, and our world's not teaching it to us well. So I think our kids are picking up on those kinds of issues just as they watch us and how we interact with some of that subject matter. That's not telling anybody what to believe about policies, but just where your kids are learning things from your sense of compassion for people who are in a place of need. I think they mentioned some other good examples, whether it's how we care for the elderly. When your kids get to a certain age, the fun in life is not what those slow old people are doing. It's the people like them, and it's the movers and shakers, and it's the fun people. How do we turn their attention to older people, who they are, their needs? How can we teach them to interact with them? How can they come to church on a Sunday morning and be mindful? Right? This is a little bit of an awareness thing. Our kids are used to paying attention to themselves. That's natural in them. How to teach them to pay attention to others it's a challenge. And so I think one of the things I think Gina always did this extremely well was, I think one of them described this, was teaching them before you arrive there, giving them some scenarios. Okay, I won't mention any names, but Gina's like, okay, now when you walk in the door, Mr. So-and-so is going to come up to you, and he's going to say this and this and this, because it was so predictable. And when the kids are little, it's kind of like they didn't know whether to run or growl or, and so, okay, so when they do that, you're going to shake him and you're going to look him in the eye, you're going to shake his hand, and you're going to give him a hug or whatever. I think those things teach people to be other-minded. So older people, right? We've got a significant, population of the church that's older. Our kids need to learn to be mindful of them, because they're a little uncomfortable with our kids, quite honestly. Sometimes our kids move around and they're too busy, and older people are kind of like, oh, that's freaking me out. I'm going to get run over. I'm going to trip. I'm going to fall down. So that's a teaching them about who are the marginalized, who are the people that we need to have a mindfulness toward these kinds of people. I mean, that's just a couple of examples, but I think that installs in them to think towards others and fill in some thought about their lives. I don't know if you had any other thoughts on that. All right, one more. Phyllis. Grandparent Phyllis.
I can speak to my children who are grown up, and I can say, hey, we're supposed to honor Christ, we're supposed to bring glory to God in our actions. So I can speak to them, but I have grandchildren, and they're in my life a lot, or I'm in their life a lot. How do I speak to them when I don't have the assurance that they're saved? So they know about Christ, they know the gospel. Somewhat repent here and there by their actions, but my tendency is to say, when you're having conflicts with people or friends, you're supposed to show Christ. When Jane was growing up, I could do that. She was on the team, and you could do that. But I have grandkids, and they play ball with players, and there's conflicts at school, conflicts here. How do I lead them when I'm not? How do I lead them to be Christ-like?
Yeah.
If I don't know, I can speak on my behalf, but how do I
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think two things. One is how to interact with a question mark about salvation. And I think you just need to read the room, so to speak, because if you go in the wrong direction with that, you can become damaging. And so, a young person is not going to be a straight line in terms of their demonstration of salvation. It's going to be very zigzaggy. And so I need to be prepared for that. And if I start denying their expression of faith, if I challenge that, deny it constantly, I don't know if that's going to serve them well. If I'm wrong in believing that you're saved and later on that proves to be false, that really wasn't who you were, I kind of can leave that to God, I think. I think God can work that out. I think, grandparents have this unique place of kind of helping ask some questions about a child's experience and what they're going through and what they did and what they felt and what they were thinking about and some of those things, without necessarily always feeling like it's your obligation to conclude that for them, but just to get them to start thinking in some categories. You can have a long-time relationship with your grandkids, so this is not the only moment you're going to talk to them. So reading the room, so to speak, in that sense, I think is important. I would say this, and this will be the last thing I'll say, and we'll talk about this, I think, more next week, because the article we gave you about lost describes a condition, right? There is an inner condition in our children. That is the real issue. What they're doing on the outside, you can get a child, especially, and I've watched this for years. I was a youth pastor, watched it for years. If you're raising a child who's a people pleaser, you can get that child to look like they're Moses Jr. I mean, they know the law and they're going to keep it, and because what you don't know is this is not the work of the Spirit. It's their desire to get you to like them. And they figured out what your script is. You like this kind of behavior. You like it when I talk about God. You like it when I like to go to church. And you don't know for sure whether that's coming out of a place of regeneration or it's coming out of their desire for you to approve of them. And you're going to need some maturity for that to get worked out. But teenagers, and we'll talk about this more next week, but teenagers have got a forest fire going on inside of them. They are so conflicted. There's so much going on. There's so much physiologically going on with them. So they're getting a new dose of hormones, and no one knew when that was coming in. And it's a lot this day, and then 2 weeks later it's nothing, and then it's pouring in again after that. And then they've got pressures of socially trying to figure out who they are. They're starting to figure out that you're not their future. And so living at home with mom and dad forever is no longer like keeping them. When they're 7 and 8, they love that idea. When they get to be teenagers, they're kind of like, you're not my future. Who is my future? And that starts to freak them out. Who are my people going to be? So they got a war of sociology going on in them. They're emotionally unstable. I mean, they just are. And they're they don't own enough mentally to solve their emotional issues. So thinking needs to outweigh emotions. And I'll talk to you next week about you're living in a world that has forgotten about thinking. It only recognizes emotions. Everything is about emotions. So they don't own enough yet. I mean, your smartest teenager doesn't own enough theologically and in their hearts to be able to undo the waves of emotion that are going off inside of them. So if you expect their Christianity to look like it's mature and settled, it's just probably not. And then you thrust them into settings like sports. Right? I mean, hey, I played sports with grown adults that I wonder whether they were saved. I mean, and I thought you were saved forever here, but good night. This brings out the worst in you. So there's going to be some of those elements too that I think I would just lean into being understanding. I think when we've had conversations with our kids, I was not the ideal teenager, especially, before I was saved. So I think I would start my conversations with them with my own resume. Hey, look, when I was your age, I was this and this and this. You are so far ahead of me, but I'm about to correct them for something. But I'm putting myself in the same world with them, so they just don't feel that all I'm doing is looking down on you and pointing something out for you, and you need to be, and establishing something that now they feel like they're failing. Very aware that, my presence in their life could feel like you're not measuring up if I'm not careful. So a lot of that was about, hey, let me just tell you about me before I tell you about you. But there was always conversation that went to, my kids didn't always like this, but hey, can you tell me why you may have done that to your sister? Just take a shot at that. Why do you think you did that? Because that's a more important question, because that's the internal workings of what happened on the outside. And now I'm getting closer to the epicenter of where the Spirit operates in my child's life. So again, these are big questions, great questions though, and thanks for asking as a grandparent. Just super helpful to hear you guys' perspective. And I violated my own rule. We went over tonight. All right, well, we'll pick up next week. Please take the article on authority. Between loss and authority, we could just talk about those two articles for quite a while, but super important principles. Thank you guys. We'll see you next week.